Breaking news out of college football, where former Arizona State quarterback Sam Leavitt is expected to transfer to LSU. That's our latest from our Matt Zinnes and Chris Hummer. He's the #1 overall player in the transfer portal, according to our partners at 24/7 Sports. Now, he took visits to Miami, LSU, Tennessee, and Kentucky before ultimately planning to head there with Lane Kiffin to Baton Rouge. He only appeared in 7 games last year with the Sun Devils this season due to injury, but totaled 15 touchdowns and 3 interceptions, but now heading to be a Tiger. All right, for more of this, take a look at this. You see it right here. We're almost done when it comes to those QBs. Just one more name remaining, Hassan Longstreet, but Sam Leavitt was the #1 guy still looking to put his name in the hat for a new place. Dylan Raiola earlier today taking his talents from Nebraska to Oregon, maybe as QB1, depending on what Dante Moore does, but we'll have to see what Longstreet does. But right now, I want to talk more about Sam Leavitt. My guy Shehan, Jeyarajah tapping in, and Sam was a name that we talked about in LSU weeks ago. Now that it's official, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great fit. I mean, in a lot of ways, I felt like Sam Leavitt was my top quarterback in the portal. You go back to the 2024 season, his addition at Arizona State completely transformed that program. He was a huge part of getting them to the college football playoff and nearly pulling a monumental upset against Texas in the playoffs. So I think that now going to LSU, he's the type of playmaker who can really transform what Lane Kiffin's going to do in Baton Rouge. He's a guy who has a lot of experience, who's a very dynamic playmaker, can make things happen both with his arm and legs, and also extend plays with his legs as well. I think that he's the sort of player who immediately raises both the floor and the ceiling of LSU in 2026.
Something we can't wait to see with him there. Of course, you talk about his ability and pounding and put him there with Lane Kiffin. You kind of touched on it in terms of what he can do, but just seeing what we saw him do in Arizona State, how does this propel them to getting closer to maybe that national championship?
Yeah, I think it's really big. I mean, when you look at LSU in 2025, I mean, obviously they were a quality team, but, you know, their offense did hold them back at points. And especially when you had a player like Garrett Nussmeier, who was so much of a pocket passer, I think that there were moments where their offensive line let them down. Well, one of the things with Leavitt, especially again, when you compare him to when he came in at Arizona State, was that he was able to deal with some of the uncertainty and some of the pressure. He does a really good job of passing and staying composed even when he's being blitzed and rushed. And I think that he's also able to keep his eyes downfield and keep those receivers involved. You saw moments in 2025 where LSU really struggled to do that. So he's just a kind of band-aid over a lot of the ills of LSU in 2025. And you add that with a great offensive mind like Lane Kiffin leading the way, I mean, there could be fireworks coming in Baton Rouge.
When you look at it, of course, the QB market, now you have 3 of the big dogs in Lagway, Leavitt, and also Dylan Raiola today, all spoken for with their teams. How does this leave the QB market now in terms of maybe the next guy? Because we've talked about schools that are still looking. Miami, one of those schools, Tennessee. When you look at these names, of course, obviously just one in Hassan Longstreet. Where does this leave the market for others?
Yeah, the market is pretty filled up at this point. I mean, you point out Longstreet, he's a player who's only going to be a redshirt freshman after being at USC a year. So not necessarily a sure thing who's ready to come in and start at a program like Miami or Tennessee. Now, that still might happen because he's a very talented player, but I think that for these quarterback hungry teams, there's just not a lot of players left available. And, you know, with Miami, of course, the last 2 years, you've seen them actually pull guys going from the NFL draft to come back to college. It'll be curious to see, you know, do they manage to do that once again? Do they have a player that they feel good about as a long-term developmental player on campus? I mean, there's a lot of questions, I think, around this program, but when you talk about the top level players who are going to be instant game changers at their programs, I think most of them are spoken for at this point.
I was going to ask that. I want to bring that list up one more time. When you look at that list of the guys now finding their new homes, in your eyes, Shehan, who has the best fit in terms of that new home looking at these QBs?
Yeah, I mean, I love really how most of these guys ended up working out, but it's hard for me to look away from Drew Mestemaker, the North Texas quarterback, going with his head coach Eric Morris to Oklahoma State. They've done a tremendous job in the portal, going back and forth. I think right now they have the #1 transfer class in the country, and they had a whole big roster to build, but they brought obviously Mestemaker, they brought his top wide receiver Wyatt Young, his top running back Caleb Hawkins, and they've also beefed up that offensive line in a big way. I think he's going to be able to step right into the Big 12 and immediately be one of the best quarterbacks in that conference and give Oklahoma State to really quickly go from 1-11 to one of the Big 12 contenders.
It didn't take that long in terms of him finding a new home and talking about Sam Leavitt and others there. Shehan, Jeyarajah, appreciate your time breaking that news down. And when it comes to LSU and Lane Kiffin finding his quarterback, take a look at it again. Those numbers obviously didn't play too much with that injury last year, 7 games, but 16-4 in 2 seasons out there in Arizona State and led them to that Big 12 title, which really got them on the main stage there, but redshirt in 2023. But we'll see what happens there in Baton Rouge. For more of the conversation, I want to bring in my guy Chris Hummer, who obviously, Chris, we have been talking about Sam Leavitt ad nauseum the last couple hours, the last couple of weeks. But here it is. LSU is where he's heading. Your thoughts on that?
It's the player that LSU needed, man. Like, LSU needed this. Like, I mean, needed this. Like, if they had missed on Sam Leavitt and Lane Kiffin had promised the fan base the moon after after LSU goes out and steals Ole Miss's coach, like, it would have been, like, problematic in year 1 for Lane Kiffin. They need to compete for national championships right away based on what they paid Lane Kiffin and that staff, based on what Lane Kiffin has promised. And Sam Leavitt is the type of quarterback who allows LSU to at least have a shot to do so. And beyond that, Sam Leavitt's the type of presence who helps LSU recruit receivers. It helps LSU recruit offensive linemen, because that offensive line still needs to be fixed in the portal. They need a lot of pieces there. Like, Sam Leavitt is a piece that can make people believe. It's a huge addition for LSU. And as you were mentioning with Shehan just a second ago, had they missed, there weren't a lot of options left on the table. You might have been talking about Hassan Longstreet with no experience starting for you. So getting Sam Leavitt in the boat is monumental for LSU.
Just that relationship and knowing what Lane has done with the quarterbacks. Obviously, Trinidad is the latest example, but obviously Sam Leavitt a little more proven. What does that relationship look like between Lane and Sam here?
Well, it looks good enough to get him committed. I think there might have been a little strain for the two of them on his official visit when the Damon Williams news broke at the same time as Sam Leavitt was on campus for an official visit sitting next to Lane Kiffin at a basketball game. I think there was some real conversations that had to be had, and there's a reason why Lane Kiffin flew out to Knoxville to meet with Sam Leavitt. I think they needed to have those discussions, and I think moving forward, like, this is one of the best quarterback coach tandems in the country. Sam Leavitt is as talented as they come from a quarterback perspective. I think had he left for the draft this year without that injury, he would have been a borderline day 1 pick for NFL teams. He obviously has some recovering to do from an injury standpoint, might not be back until after the spring. But you give Lane Kiffin that type of clay to mold, he might have his next Jackson Dart, and I know that's the way they've been selling him.
The next Jackson Dart, how about the next Fernando Mendoza? Does that make it closer to them, seeing obviously what he did in Indiana? Can Sam be that guy for LSU?
He absolutely can. I don't know if the supporting pieces are there in the same way for Fernando Mendoza, but also if you'd asked me this time last year, I didn't think Indiana would be 15-0 and playing for a national championship. So it's very possible. But Sam Leavitt has that type of ceiling. He does almost everything really well as a quarterback. And he's the type of guy who also wants to be challenged. And I think Lane Kiffin can do that for Sam Leavitt. He can coach him hard. He can coach him up. And he gives LSU a chance. Like, that's what you're looking for this time of year. You're not looking for a 100% solution. You're looking to give yourself a chance. And by landing Sam Leavitt, our #1 player on the 24/7 Sports transfer portal rankings, LSU gives itself a chance to be in that mix next year in a way it hasn't been the last couple of seasons.
All right, Chris, I'm going to bring this list up one more time, and we may be, I don't know, we may have something else coming down the pipeline, but we have one more quarterback remaining. Hassan Longstreet, of course, obviously others are putting pen to paper. What does his future look like? There are some still maybe teams looking for a QB. What does his future look like?
Well, Hassan Longstreet's going to have to make a decision of whether he wants to be a backup next year. He didn't want to back up Jaden Mavia at USC this season. He hopped in the portal for a reason, but he's visited LSU. He can take more visits once the dead period comes to a close on Wednesday. That means players can start visiting schools again. Right now, they can't do it for the next couple days. So Longstreet has to decide whether he's comfortable being a backup for a year and potentially being Sam Leavitt's succession plan, or if he's willing to go back and take more visits and maybe start somewhere else next year. So that's what he has in front of him. But we do have 2 major programs out there in Tennessee and in Miami looking for QB1s, and maybe Hassan Longstreet is the guy for them.
What happens to them as they look for their QBs of the future? Obviously, Miami is busy right now, but what happens to both those schools as they look for their next quarterback?
Well, Tennessee visited Bo Prabula from Missouri very recently. I can see that being a marriage. Miami's the more interesting option, in my opinion, at least. Like, we've seen Miami throw Hail Marys 2 seasons in a row in the portal. 1 to get Cam Ward from coming back to the NFL, and 2 to get Carson Beck to do the same. And I don't know, maybe like Ty Simpson would be the call I would expect them to make. I think they've been quietly making those calls anyway. And if you can convince Ty Simpson to do it 3 years in a row, who knows? Maybe Miami will be back in the national championship game in 2027. But Miami's shown a very big history of being aggressive in terms of finding its transfer portal quarterback, and I expect it to continue to be doing so all the way up until the deadline on Friday night when the portal closes. Expect Miami to be pushing as hard as they can.
Ty Simpson, NIL over NFL. We'll see if that is a thing for him, of course, at Alabama last season. Before I let you go, I want to take a look at this list here. And the same thing I asked Shehan in terms of the QBs that are now committed to new schools. Who maybe has the best fit in your eyes in terms of their new home, offensive scheme, and chance to really do something here in 2026?
Well, I loved his answer about Drew Mestamaker. I love the fit for Brendan Sorsby at Texas Tech, but I'm going to go all the way down to number 10 and point to Josh Hoover. You mentioned Fernando Mendoza recently. I see no reason why Josh Hoover can't do something similar to Fernando Mendoza. He's just as talented. He's going to be going into a system in Indiana that he's a perfect fit for, just a lot of these quick RPO looks that Josh Hoover's been so successful at in his career. And I think Josh Hoover is going to be able to keep the ball rolling for Indiana. I think he's a super talented quarterback. I think he's a perfect fit. And I think Curt Cignetti is going to coach him up. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're looking at a potential first-round pick or day 2 pick for Josh Hoover this time next year.
We have a Buckeye and a Horned Frog very upset at you in the control room. They will remain nameless, but we'll see what happens here with Josh Hoover at Indiana. In the meantime, appreciate it, Chris Hummer, and all the breaking news here when it comes to Sam Leavitt taking his talents to LSU along with others. Dylan Raiola got busy. Deuce Knight got busy early a couple days ago. So we just got one more guy, Hassan Longstreet from USC. Where is he going to go? You can find all that out on the YouTube page for college football and use that QR code quick.